Hello everybody and welcome to Metrum Institute's webcast, MI210, The Essentials of Population PK/PD Modeling and Simulation. My name is Mark Dastingay and I'm Chairman and Scientific Director at Metrum Institute and also the Course Director for MI210. I want to welcome you and thank you for considering Metrum courses. This is a very popular course that we offer, and we've got a nice sized class for this semester. And I want to thank you for your participation ahead of time. Today, the real goal of our session is to work out some of the kinks in the interface and to really give you an orientation to the way we're going to be teaching this course. And so as a starting point here, I'm going to share with you the GoToWebinar control panel and review a few of the features of this software and how we run the web meetings. So first of all, I'm going to open up the chat window. And you'll see that there are a couple of messages there already. First is a note that if you're having any technical difficulties during these live webcasts, you can contact Joe Hebert directly. His phone number's there and his email address is listed. And he's online here while we're teaching and is available if you have any difficulties with either viewing the webcast or hearing the audio. Anything like that would be something you can contact Joe about. You can also chat a message if you have a question or a technical support issue. Now the chat box is also important here throughout the course because this is the way that we're going to communicate between student and instructor. And there's a couple of ways that you can do that. One thing that you might do to get my attention or whoever the instructor might be on that given day is above in the attendee list. I think yours as a participant has an option to raise your hand. There should be a little hand. And if you do that, that'll at least signify that there's somebody with a question. And what will happen then is they'll look for a convenient point to pause and to address that question. Now, what we're going to ask you to do is to ask your questions through a text chat by simply selecting the chat box down here at the bottom of the interface. And you type your message in here. I have a question about, and so on. You can be as concise as you'd like there. And then you can send it to a particular attendee, to the entire audience, or just the instructor. Unless you have some real reason not to, I think it'd be worthwhile to send that to the entire audience so that we can all benefit from the question and answer, and then I don't have to do a lot of repeating of questions for the broader group. But if you forget to do that, I'll repeat the question. And then you just simply type send. Okay? So that's the primary mode of communication. We're not going to use individual audio in this class because the class size is too large to do that, and not everybody has appropriate setup with a microphone headset. A few other things about the interface here. Just for your own use, if you want to get this out of your screen, you'll notice at the top left of this tab there's a arrow that points to the right that hides the control panel. Then you can slide this to the side and get it out of your way. But if you want to see the control panel, you just click it again. In addition to that, there's a couple of other things that you might be interested in. There's an audio setting here which will define who's talking and whether or not your mic and speakers are on. We're not going to use the questions tab. Instead, we'll use chats. And then polls. We were having a little bit of fun there with the polls before the class started. And we'll use this throughout the course, not just for trivial questions, but also to reinforce some of the concepts and ask questions about the content of the course throughout the series here. Just to review with you all what we found. The first question was how many of you have attended Metrum Institute courses before, and we had a couple different categories. It looks like about 85% of you are in your first Metrum Institute course, so welcome. And then the rest of you have attended only 1 or 2 courses in the past, so thanks for coming back. The other question we had was about NONMEM installations, and this was just out of curiosity. As you know, a NONMEM installation or any population PK modeling software simulation, installation is not necessary for this course, and I'll explain why that's the case later. But the answer, just out of curiosity, there was that about 46% have NONMEM 6 installed or earlier, and then the remaining fraction don't have any software installed locally. So that's fine. You know, that there's no need for you to have the software, and in fact, taking a course like this is a good first step in maybe determining if you do want to go to that step. And then the last polling question I had was one about why you're here, and pretty evenly balanced answer there between gaining the skills necessary to do their job versus just gaining an appreciation for the topic. So I thought you might be interested in what the answers were there. All right. Besides that, most of these controls on the GoToWebinar control panel are really for my own use. I don't think there's anything else that you're going to want to know here. But if there are any questions, yeah, please do just chat them into the control panel, and I'll address those. So for now, I'm going to hide the control panel, and we'll move on. Okay, so you should all see the title page now of our first handout for the course. I'm going to scroll through a few of these topics, and like I said, today's course probably going to be a shorter session today. This will be the only session that's going to be significantly shorter, but this is just in order to get us an orientation of the tools and how we're going to work here. And then next week we'll hit the ground running with more content. So let's go over a few topics here. As you know, the course is scheduled for lectures on Tuesdays and labs on Fridays. The Tuesday sessions will typically be a 2-hour session. We might have a short break midway through that. Fridays will typically be a day for hands-on exercises, demos, maybe reviewing the practice problems. But in some cases, we might need to use the Friday to finish up a lecture topic. And you know, we'll see how it goes. If there are a lot of questions, or if there are some areas that seem to be very well understood, you know, that may help us to accelerate through one part of the course, or slow down and take more time on another part. And by the way, this document that I'm showing right now is available on the website. I'll show you how to get there in case you haven't downloaded this yet. But I thought I'd just use this as a guide for our discussion today. Some of you are taking this course as part of the Metrum Institute Pharmacometrics Certificate Program. This is a program where you have I think six core courses and some electives to take, and at the end of that you'll get a certificate in pharmacometrics. I think that most of you may be just taking this for your own education, and that's fine too. But in order to obtain a certificate of successful completion of this course, these are the requirements or expectations. First of all, homework problems are really up to you to manage, but we expect you to do the homework problems and exercises sometime between the lecture and the Friday lab session. We're not going to collect these, we're not going to grade them, but we will review the solutions with the entire class on a weekly basis. So it's to your advantage to try to run through these at some point before the lab session. And I know what work schedules are like. That's not always going to be possible, and you know, there's no detrimental effect there other than that, you know, maybe you won't have the opportunity to reinforce the particular topic before we do the lab session, but you can always go back and do it later. There will be a midterm exam and a final exam. These are both take-home multiple choice exams. Nothing really too crazy here. Just something to evaluate how we're doing as instructors, and also to reinforce the concepts that we think are the most important. These are again required for the certificate, and you'll all have an opportunity to do that. Usually we give you about a week to complete the exams, and then we collect them, and then we provide answers. Okay, also those who are working on who would like to get a certificate of completion will be required to do a project that goes along with this course. And you know, this is going to be a scaled down version of something that you might actually be doing in a real world modeling and simulation application. But the idea is to create something that will be based on a real world or similar problem, and that it will include some of the tools, techniques, and concepts that we've covered in the course, everywhere from data assembly to development of the model, evaluating the model, and even a brief write-up. And then the grade for the course will be comprised of those three pieces, the midterm and final, together making 50%, and the modeling project 50%. Okay. Any questions on the course requirements for those who are taking it for certificate? Great. So next, I want to introduce you to something that's going to be very useful in our communication throughout this course, and that's our course content management site, or we might call it the course homepage. You can find it at training.metruminstitute.org. And the nice thing about this is that when anything is posted here, whether it's new material or a new post to a discussion forum, if you're registered here, you'll get an email notification of those postings. So this is really the go-to site for the course, and everything that you need to get to you'll be able to find here, or you'll have a link to that particular site. So let's take a look at the site. I've got it open behind here. I'm just going to expand a little bit so you maybe see a bit better. I'm getting a couple of messages that the volume is too low here on the audio, and I'm going to try see if I can adjust that any. Just bear with me for a moment. Yeah, there we go. That's the output volume. Here's the input volume. Let's see, is that any better? Hopefully that helps. And if not, let me know. I can crank it up all the way. So this particular site really is the home for our entire course, and you'll see an initial message here that Joe has actually set up that describes links to our news forum, discussion forum, technical support, and so on. You'll be able to use these. For example, the news forum is a place where we'll post new information about schedule changes, other events associated with the course, timing for exams, that sort of stuff. The discussion forum is really for your use, and you can get it through this link directly, or you can go to the side panel there. But you can, for example, if you had a question about a particular topic, you could start a discussion topic here, where you just have a question. Let's say a question about heteroscedastic variance. I don't get it, and so on, and then we could send that out to the entire group, post it to the forum, and somebody else might be able to pick it up from that point. So either the instructor then would see that, or even members of the class could pick up and answer that question. So this is a useful way to communicate even when we're outside of the class. And if you miss the webcast, we will also post on this site the recording, audio-visual recording of the lecture, which you could listen to at some later point. If you have some question that arises that you weren't able to ask live, then you can enter the discussion forum, post a new thread, or contribute to an existing thread, and we can continue the learning that way. Let me just get some confirmation from everybody that the volume is a little bit better now. Any comments on that? I'll look for a chat message here in a minute. In addition to the discussion forums, we also have a technical support forum. This is a place to post your queries and tickets for any technical problems, like difficulties logging into this site, logging into the web server, difficulty downloading the course materials, and so on. Okay. Well, while we're here, I'm gonna you can read through the course notes for the rest of these topics, but I'm going to also demonstrate a little bit more from the home page here. All of you who are on this webcast have already signed up for the webcast registration, so you don't have to worry about that again. There's another link here for the application server, and we'll go there in just a minute. But that's your link to your computing resource throughout the course of this lecture series. Below this, we see here for each week there's a section where we may include materials to be downloaded. We might include just some specific notes or comments. It's a good idea to check this before every class. We'll try to get everything up there at least by the Monday before the Tuesday class, but it's worth a good look just in case there's anything that pops up at the last minute before the Tuesday afternoon session. And you'll see here that we've got our first chapter notes posted for the first one. When you click on this, it should begin to download automatically. Okay. We'll talk about the server in just a minute. But the course materials that you download, that will include not only the lecture materials, but it will also include any of the data sets, the hands-on examples, model code, anything that we're going to use in the actual problem-solving side of things. And we've got some instructions here for you on how to download and to manage those example sets. Including downloading it locally, logging into the web server, which I'll show you in a minute, and then some directions on how to unpack and upload that into your own directory on that server. As I point out here, you probably also find it useful to extract from that zip file the PDF document if you want to use it locally, maybe annotate it using some sort of PDF editor, or just printing it out. Okay, so next let's talk about the web server. So still no confirmation on the volume here, so I'm going to guess that there are no problems in hearing me now. All right. So the Metrum Institute R web server. This is actually an innovation of our own here at Metrum Institute. To expose all of these modeling and simulation tools in a high-performance computing environment. In this case here, we have a multi-core server that's running behind the scenes and taking care of all of our classroom activities. And some of the research in our own group has led to the development of this tool. We call it SemiServer Interface, or by Metrum Institute. The nice thing about this is it allows you to have access to NONMEM, the Fortran compiler behind the scenes, NMQual, which is the installation utility, and R, which is a language that we use for a lot of pre and post processing of population PK/PD work, as well as MIfuns, which is a package that we've developed of a lot of useful tools in the R language for modeling and simulation of population PK/PD. All of this software is maintained and installed by us for you, and we've actually set up individual accounts for each of you on this server. So you don't have to worry about any software installation or licenses. All of these tools, except for NONMEM and the Intel Fortran, all the rest of these are free open source software. But we manage the NONMEM and Intel licenses, and that's covered as part of your course fees. So in order to get to the web server, you can use any browser really. I think if there are any glitches with those, sometimes some older versions of IE6, Internet Explorer 6, used to be troublesome, but I think we've gotten around all of that. If you end up having any difficulties, again, post it to that tech support the tech support discussion forum. Sorry. So we're going to go over to the server application here. I'm going to show you a little bit of what's behind the scenes. So I'm going to log in, and you should each have received a login name and password for this server. And you'll see a web-based interface now. There are multiple pages. There's a home page, which is really sort of a file repository, almost like a browser for your file system. There's a guide, which is some help or user guide for the use of this server and interface. There's an interface to R. R, as you've heard me say, is a statistical programming language that we use quite commonly in modeling and simulation, and we'll use extensively in this course. I'll take the opportunity to tell you that don't be concerned if you haven't got a lot of experience with R. I know some of you have probably taken our introductory R for pharmacometrics course. We build a lot on that material, but we also supply all of the source R code that you need for the problems. So if you're not an R specialist yet, that's okay. Don't worry about it. We'll get you what you need to get by, and you'll pick up some of the R language along the way. If you are planning to do this sort of modeling simulation on a routine basis, this would be an excellent language to learn, and you might consider taking a specific course in R, whether through our series or elsewhere. I think it would be helpful. The next page here is one where you can change your password. I know that some of you have already done that. It's just basically some user administration and password administration. The models page right now is empty. That's something that will come later, where we might have some canned models up and running for you. The course page takes you back to the course page. Sorry about that. And then the other thing that's really handy here is that we have two help sources here. One is the NONMEM help files, and so you have help files for NONMEM 7. Let me minimize a little bit. And in case you've never used the online NONMEM help, you see that there's a link back here to NONMEM 6 that you can click to, but it'll have the same sort of interface, where if there's a particular topic you want to search for, you just use the alphabetical letter, number, or character that begins that keyword, and you can search that way, or you can look at some of the help categories. And we'll spend plenty of time looking at this throughout the course, but just for example, if we wanted to look at some example pieces of code, you can click an example, and for example, control 3. Well, here's the model code for this particular example. So that's a handy feature here. It's built into the interface. You just need to click the NONMEM help. And then side by side with that, we have help for R. R is the interface language that we're using, and I'll show you what that looks like here. We click on R. This comes again right from the R package through the R project. This is open source software, but very flexible, very powerful software. But there's all kinds of information here. If you wanted a gentle introduction, you hadn't used R before, you might want to explore this a little bit. There's an introduction to R. You can look at some simple topics like manipulating vectors and objects. It's really nice help system, and quite handy. You can search on keywords as well too. Let's say we wanted to look on lattice, and we search for lattice, and we can look at the lattice graphics. Find the help file in there. So again, we'll spend plenty of time digging into the help files as we're working through problems. But when you're doing your homework and you don't have an instructor nearby, this is a good resource for you to use. And then finally is the log out button, which will log you out of this system. Let's go back to the home page for a minute. Before I go into more detail here, any questions? Looks pretty quiet so far, so let's go into more detail. You'll have more practice with this once we get into hands-on examples, but the general setup here is like a file directory where those files that are listed with just a name underlined here, that's just the name of a file. Here there's a PDF file. You can download that file. You can edit, which just pulls it up in an editor, or you can click it directly, and if it's something that displays in your browser, you'll see, for example, a plot. Okay. The file or the names here that are included in square brackets, these are actually directory names. So if you click on MI210W, this is in my project folder, it's not going to be present in yours just yet. That drills down to another level, and then from there are subdirectories, and you can see the subdirectories are all indicated by parentheses, and then again another subdirectory with problems, and then finally you see different files. Now, how do we get back up there? Well, there's this one name, or this one symbol here on every page, which is just a dot in square brackets. That means go back up one level. So that'll take you back up. If you hit the root, that'll take you all the way back home. But the dot just pulls you up one level at a time until you're back to the home page. Now you're able to select and maybe select all or just one or two and download those files as a zip file if you want to take them locally. You can create a directory by just typing in the name of the directory. Let's say we just called it test, and we can create a directory called test, and now you see there's a test directory here which is empty. We can navigate back up. You can create a file, you can move files, copy files, rename, and you're welcome to play around with this. It's pretty intuitive after you have a little bit of experience with it. One thing to notice is that in the bottom it always tells you where your current directory is here. So right now I'm in users mark G. If I drill down to the next level, you'll see here it's now users mark G MI210W. Let me illustrate something else that's kind of handy here. When we go into a particular example, we've got a control stream here. This is a model file. It's a text file, and we'll see plenty of these in the course. You could download it. You could just open it in the browser, or you can edit that file, and that brings up an editor that we'll use frequently. The nice thing about the editor here is you can scroll up and down. You can edit text, but you can also select sections of text and evaluate them, and that's particularly helpful if you're using R where you have a large script in R and you want to just highlight subsections of code and execute them. Again, we'll go through that in more detail as we work on the hands-on problems. You'll notice here that the default text setting for all of these is Unix. That's because we're running on a Unix server, and it just has to do with text files and the particular the file ending characters. They're different between Unix and MS-DOS and Windows. Although DOS and Windows can read a Unix text file, it's just in some editors like Notepad, things get a little jumbled. If you look at a Unix-based text file, you want to use probably a more sophisticated editor, maybe something like WordPad or WinEdit or Notepad+, something like that, or even just Microsoft Word. Okay, so that's the overview to the server interface. So you all have accounts for this. Your home account is your home directory is going to be empty until we provide some course examples. But you can go ahead and play around and create files. You're not going to mess up anybody else's directory, so there's no problem if you want to play around with this a little bit, creating directories, creating text files, editing text files, and so on. And even if you just want to use this to browse NONMEM help or R help, you have access to that right away. Okay. So I'm going to go back to the notes here. Any questions on the WebServer Interface? Okay. So you talked about the course materials and how you might want to unpack them. Again, just logging into the same server we just did. You'd upload your package in your home directory using the upload button. Find that package in the file list and then unpack it. Which the unpack option is available for anything that's a zip file. And then we create a new folder with the contents of the course. A couple other notes here is that as we create the course notes, we're going to try to do this in sort of a textbook format. The convention that we use is that if there's any model code or programming language code that shows up in the context of the text, we'll use a fixed width font in the text. If we're going to use blocks of code to describe something, we'll have this black text on this light blue background, and then if it's an output result, we'll use this other syntax with the blue text on a white background. That's just to differentiate between what's input, what's output, and what's code versus the handout text. Okay, before we get into the course topics, I'm going to just address another question here. Joe asked me to mention that in the chat box, let me show you that. So if we go back to the GoToWebinar control panel, you might see something like this. Next to each piece here, there's this arrow, which allows you to expand that particular section. Under chat, you can expand the chat, and then you can enter the chat question. You can read other answers and so on. Okay, so use these arrows on the left here to identify or to expand on any one of these boxes. Or if you don't want to look at any of this, just minimize the whole thing. Okay. All right. Next, then we'll proceed to the topic of the content in the course and how it's organized and what we're trying to do here. This offering of MI210 is actually a revision of a course that we've offered for multiple years now. And there's a few reasons that we've decided to rewrite this course. One is that we have new software tools available. The first course was written when only the classic estimation methods were available. But now with multiple tools such as NONMEM 7 and Monolix and SAdapt, there's all these other engines out there with different estimation methods, and we figured we should address those new algorithms. Secondly, we've sort of shifted the goal of the training here to be more of an overall teaching of population PK/PD modeling and simulation in context in the real world, but teaching you the concept in theory and applications, and not so much a course that's aimed at the technical implementation of, how do you run a particular piece of software, push this button here, type that code there. There'll be plenty of examples of code and so on, but the focus here is understanding, well, why are we choosing that option? What does that option mean? What assumption is being made behind the scenes, and that's really what we want to get across here. So when you get out of this course, hopefully you'll be at a point where you understand some of the theory and the concepts, and then really have a knowledge that's independent of software, whereas the skills will obviously come by practice with a particular set of software tools. But we want to balance that in this course. So one way to do that is to build our course examples around a real-world problem. And so through the whole semester here, we're going to be working on a hypothetical drug development program. We've got a new drug here, MI210A, of course, a hypothetical molecule. It's a novel mechanism, new chemical entity, under investigation as an analgesic for both acute and chronic pain. And we're going to tackle the modeling simulation support as part of the development here. So we're going to view this as if we're part of a development team, and it's our goal to support the decision making through modeling and simulation. And so we'll start with some of the basics, and then get all the way through a submission type analysis, as really a learning exercise, but also one that helps you to map the continuation and shows the sort of iterative nature of modeling and simulation. So let me highlight what I mean by that. We're going to start off. Our first examples will deal with some early development questions, imagining that we've just received some phase 1 data from a single ascending dose study. So this is a study in healthy volunteers, typically, that would be studied over multiple dose levels, but each subject is only given a single dose. And there's safety evaluation as you escalate from lower doses to higher. But you end up with some useful data from a PK point of view, and maybe also from a tolerability point of view. So one of our first modeling tasks is going to be to evaluate the concentration-response relationship for QT prolongation for this drug. And that's a typical thing that's done in several programs when serial ECGs are measured in phase 1. And we'll show you how to do that and use this hypothetical drug as a real-world example of this sort of work. We'll then assemble and format some of the data for a population PK analysis from the phase 1 data. So it's going to be a small population, but we can still go through the basics of developing a population PK model, what we call a base model. And then we'll turn around and we'll simulate the expected multi-dose PK profile. Okay, taking that a little bit further then, we're going to collect data from our hypothetical program here in a multiple ascending dose study. So this might be your second PK study, where now you've got multiple dose kinetics, maybe also some relevant biomarkers, toxicity endpoints, and so we're going to learn a little bit about how to build that multiple dose pharmacokinetic model in a population context, and also building some PK/PD models for the biomarker and toxicity endpoints. We'll start to address model qualification now, because we're going to want to use the models for more than just estimating parameters. We want to use them to simulate and to explore the next steps. So we'll get into that, and then we'll also take that into an extrapolation and really to guide decision making for dose selection in phase 2A. And then at that next stage will be a phase 2A proof of concept study. So we'll imagine we've collected those data. We'll refine the PK model. This is going to be in a multiple dosing setting. We'll develop exposure response for the clinical efficacy endpoints and as well as toxicity. And so some more PK/PD modeling there. And then simulate the expected phase 2B study design. So again, this is the kind of iterative building of models and evaluation of assumptions, making projections from one stage to the next that commonly goes on in model-based drug development. And then finally, we'll get to phase 3, where the 2B study is completed, phase 3 is ongoing, and so we're going to get closer to some of this end game submission strategy from a modeling point of view, where we'll want to have a formal modeling simulation plan in place. We'll assemble data across multiple studies from different phases of drug development. We'll develop a model with covariates. We'll revise the exposure response models to help support the dosing selection. We'll perform more model qualification, including predictive checks and bootstrapping. These terms might be foreign to you now, but you'll certainly understand what they mean by the time you get through there. And then even we'll talk about and start to prepare a regulatory submission report, or at least identify the components that are necessary for that sort of an endeavor. So as you can see, what we're going to try to do here over the course of a semester is something that you might do over the course of multiple years in drug development, but we're going to give you a little bit of a flavor for that as we make it through the course. Now, it's not just hands-on problem solving. We're also going to take time to intersperse within this development program some didactic lectures on different topics. And again, this goes towards not just being a technician, but actually understanding why we're doing certain things and what are the underlying concepts, theories, and assumptions. So one of the first things we'll talk about is the theory of population PK, the estimation methods used from the traditional classic methods to some of the more novel methods that have been implemented in the past 5 years or less. We'll also review data requirements and how to format data for these tools. It happens that across most of these tools, data format requirements are quite similar, and most of them have evolved from the format requirements for NONMEM. But it's a pretty handy way to code up population PK data, and you'll become quite familiar with that. We'll also talk about some considerations in building the models. We used to talk about the basic pharmacostatistical model structure for either a pharmacokinetic or PK/PD system, and we'll discuss some of the choices you might make there and how you might select between models. We'll also talk about the rationale and theory behind some of the covariate modeling methods and the ways that you might make inferences about those covariate effects. For example, if you wanted to adjust dosing in a future study according to a covariate, or if you wanted to supply labeling information for your submission based on the covariate analysis. What are the things you need to think about there? How do you construct that analysis? What are some of the pitfalls of different methods, and as well as some of the potential gains you can make by conducting these analyses. Following that, we'll learn about Monte Carlo simulation at a very basic level here. We do more of this in the advanced courses, but you'll learn enough here to understand what it is you're doing with Monte Carlo simulation, how to implement it, and what to look out for, as well as how to make use of this. That's really the most important part of modeling, is the simulation side, because that's where you actually apply the model. And so we've included a good amount of that material in this course too. Again, we'll get back to more model qualification methods. This includes things like predictive checks, bootstrapping, leverage analysis. We'll talk about these as we get there. But if we're going to take a model that we've developed from a set of data and we want to apply it to a new situation to support a decision to be made, we want to have some confidence that that model is adequate for that purpose, and that's what model qualification is all about. And then we'll tie in some practical pieces here. The regulatory guidance on population PK, and there have been regulatory documents supplied both by FDA and the EMEA, as well as other best practices documents in the private sector too, that would be useful to understand as you undertake a new analysis in the planning stages and also in the reporting stages. So we'll work in these more didactic topics as part of this problem-based course example. Okay, any questions? All right, so that's most of the content here. I want to touch on one more issue here, which is licensing. And that has to do with licensing of the materials, the examples, the code, and so on. First of all of the open source software that we mentioned earlier, let me go back up to the top, NMQual, Perl, R, MIfuns, all of these pieces are freely available on the web. NMQual and MIfuns are actually distributed by us at Metro Institute. R and Perl are distributed by separate open source development teams. These are all freely available, and you don't have to worry about licensing on those. NONMEM and Intel 4chan, you must have licenses for these, and as I said, we've taken care of that. What I'm talking about in the licensing section here is licensing of the course handouts, course materials, and so on. And so by participating in this course, you've been granted what's called a complete courseware user license, and you can look at the appendix for the fine details. But what it means is that you're free to use this material for your own work, even if you want to pull some of these examples and apply them to your own analysis in your commercial research applications. If you want to use some of the example documents that we give you for text, you're free to use those as long as you acknowledge the source. The one thing you're not free to do is to take this material and go out and use it to teach courses. And that's all described in the licensing agreement. Okay. Which is defined here. I'm not going to go through that now. You probably don't want to read it either. I just wanted to give you the warning that that's there. All right, so that's the overview of our infrastructure, what we're going to cover through the course. We've got this week is kind of a busy week for some folks. I know that some of you are attending the Clinical Pharmacology Conference in Atlanta. I'll be there too. And if you're there, please, if you have a chance to introduce yourself, I'd like to meet you all in person. If not, maybe we'll catch up at some other point. But the point is that there's no class on Friday, and what we'll do is we'll pick up at full speed next Tuesday, getting into our first problem specification and also understanding the basic theory of fitting a model to data and some of the, in particular, some of the regression methods that are used to address those types of problems. So that's where we're headed. Between now and then, explore the web resources that you have access to now. Play around with the web server, look at the help files for NONMEM and R. But this is going to be a light week for you. Probably the only light week in the course. I think we're going to be quite busy from here on out. We'll leave it at that for this session. So before I close, I'll just ask if there are any additional questions. You can raise your hand, or you can enter into the chat box. Okay, looks like everything's very clear, I guess. And we'll get started in more detail then on next Tuesday. I look forward to talking with all of you then. Thanks for your attention. If you have any questions between now and then, again, you can contact me through email or through the forum on this homepage. Thanks a lot.